In Athens, Greece, if you've ever been in Athens, the motorcycles, they never stop. They always zoom right between the cars and stop right up in front of the traffic. You might have 15, 20 of them at one time stopped up in front of all the traffic. But on this particular afternoon, it was about 4:20 in the afternoon, I heard a motorcycle coming, and it's slowed down, and it slowed down too quickly, me being the third car from the front. And so I turned to watch it, and they slowed down. They came right next to my car, and there I was sitting watching them, and the guy in the back reached to his belt and pulled out a metallic object, and right away I saw that it was a pistol of some kind. I said, oh shit, this is it.
It sounded like a firecracker. That was all it sounded like, because I remember thinking, as I closed my eyes, I remember thinking, oh, listen to all these people screaming, and it's nothing but a firecracker. But then, as my eyes opened, you saw nothing but black and smoke everywhere.
It was like a sound from the inside of your body. It's not like you hear it from the outside. It's like it just engulfs the whole entire body. And 12, 17 minutes later is when I woke up. And that's when I realized that the embassy had been hit very, very hard.
The next thing I can remember is a loud bang, and it was like the M80 simulator we use in combat defense training. Very loud. And, of course, by the time I realized what I was hearing, I was flying backwards.
It scared the hell out of me is what it did. You know, because I saw all this blood, and I was worried about my friends that were with me, because I was the one that asked them out that night. And all I could think of was, well, you went and done it now. You're going to die down here instead of back home nice and quiet.
Terrorism. It's a real and personal threat.
What must the folks back home be thinking? That's the question on the mind of every Marine in Lebanon today. Do they know whether I'm alive, or do they think I'm dead? It's an anxiety that plagues them even as they sift through the rubble, trying to find the broken bodies of their buddies. The blast that tore through the battalion landing team headquarters had the force of a one-ton bomb. The crater will be closely examined by FBI forensics experts who arrived this morning. They'll search for some firm evidence of who is behind the disaster.
The suicide bombing in Beirut that took so many U.S. Marine lives was without equal, making news headlines around the world. A vicious, premeditated attack of such magnitude that it changed forever the way this country and many other nations view the threat of terrorism and how to deal with it. But the Beirut massacre also focuses on the individual, on your vulnerability as a single member of the armed forces. It serves to introduce the concept of how personal a terrorist attack can really be.
He could do. He says his man went by. He says he'd always remember that the guy was smiling.
As the shock of just what happened is wearing off, bitterness and anger are rising to the surface. But basically, it just plain hurts.
When it's all compiled and we get the names, I think it'll hit everybody harder. But you can tell by actions that it's hurting the people now. They had a lot of friends. Well, we had a lot of friends over at the PLT. And you can tell in the men's actions the way that they feel about the situation.
Former Green Beret Brian Jenkins, now one of the country's top experts on terrorism, has spent a lot of time studying the way it feels.
Everyone we have interviewed has always made the point that I knew there was a problem with terrorism. Of course there was a concern in this particular city where I was, or this particular country, but I always thought that would happen to the other people. That would happen to the other guy. That this would not happen to me. And even when it was happening to them, they could not believe that it was happening to them.
Several months before the Marine headquarters in Beirut was bombed, Marine Staff Sergeant Charles Light survived a bombing of the U.S. Embassy.
After I woke up and realized what had happened, and started hearing the sirens and started hearing the screaming voices, people were pleading for help, and I could hear children and women crying. I started picking my way around and tried to find out where I was at. And though I'd lived in that place for 8 months, I couldn't tell where I was at. It was just that tore up, that blown away.
In defiance of the atrocity, embassy staff flew their flag as the search for more bodies and survivors went on at the destroyed building. U.S. Marines of the multinational force were brought into the area as an extra security measure and to keep away the curious. Lebanese police say that more bodies were found in the rubble overnight. The recovery work is going slowly. There is the danger that heavy machinery being used in the clearing operation could bring down the upper floors, killing anyone still trapped inside. But no one is optimistic about finding survivors.
My information from the rescue workers on the site is that it is very unlikely that anybody will be found alive who is in the building.
But there are those who wait and hope. The Islamic Holy War, a Muslim fundamentalist group, is still believed to be responsible for the attack. Police say the group organized in Burj al-Barajneh, the mainly Shiite slum suburb of Beirut. The Islamic Holy War follows the teachings of Ayatollah Khomeini and has claimed responsibility for earlier attacks on Italian, French, and U.S. Marine units of the multinational force. Embassy officials say the bomb at the embassy was a suicide mission.
To Sergeant Light, it was like reliving the horrors of war all over again.
It was almost as if they had just transported me right back in the middle of Vietnam, because it just that quick I started reacting the same as I did when I was in combat. And not that I wasn't worried, I was worried, not scared. But like I say, when the place is on fire and there's debris falling all around you, and you see parts of people laying everywhere, it tends to upset you.
Large-scale terrorist attacks and the individual human stories that go with them aren't limited to the Middle East. Look anywhere that U.S. military personnel are stationed.
The terrorists struck at midnight. They moved along the flight line, setting 2 time bombs in each of the Air National Guard fighter jets. By light of day, investigators found 8 of the planes were totally destroyed. 2 were severely damaged. The price tag is put at $45 million. A leftist group claims responsibility for the bombing. Their immediate target of criticism, the renewal of the military draft registration. But officials see this as the latest incident in a long list of political violence here in Puerto Rico. And the Guard commander says it was a very professional one at that.
They've done a good job, yes, sir. Police figured that they set the bombs around midnight when the guard shift changes, so they had a good tab on what was going on here.
The terrorists involved are the same ones connected with the ambush of a U.S. Navy bus here in Puerto Rico a year ago. 2 seamen were killed, 10 wounded. In this attack on the National Guard base, no one was hurt. But officials say that was nothing but luck.
Sometimes luck is what it takes to survive a well-planned terrorist attack, as Navy boiler technician 3rd Class Randall Keat found out.
Well, the ship pulled into San Juan, Puerto Rico, because it was supposed to be a really good Liberty port, and we were down there anyway. And one night I asked a few friends, let's go out and get a couple beers, enjoy our last night of Liberty. And as we were walking across the bridge right by the yacht club, a car came around the corner, late model sedan. I remember that after it stopped and I looked at it. And it pulled alongside the curb and opened up on us with gunfire from one automatic weapon, as far as I could tell, and a pistol. And I didn't even realize I'd been shot. It just felt like someone had hit me really hard in the stomach. And I told Larry to go ahead back to the ship, get some help, and he did. And Tony, he was luckier than Tim or me, because I had to have stuff removed from me, my intestines, and had my arm broke out of the deal, and Tim lost his life because of it.
The 3 Marines were on their way to the U.S. Embassy early this morning when their truck suddenly exploded. All 3 were injured, as was their Costa Rican driver. Costa Rican officials here don't know what caused the explosion, but they believe it was a homemade bomb or a grenade. The explosion was so powerful it blew out the back window of the car driving in front of the Marines' truck. Costa Rican officials have no suspects, but they believe it was done by a well-organized extremist group.
Extremists don't have boundaries. Terrorists can travel anywhere for any cause. In London, a letter bomb blew up in a Navy non-com's hands, and he survived. Still, the incident shows how difficult it is to counteract terrorist tactics. They often use disguises, including official and official-looking uniforms. They count on speed and surprise, hoping their victim won't be alert enough to anticipate the attack or escape it. They're innovative, learning from their mistakes and capable of ingenious planning, and they often have better weapons than the authorities.
The blast was apparently caused by a time bomb placed next to a pillar inside the bar. The force of the explosion shattered windows, and many of the nearly 80 victims had pieces of glass and metal embedded in their bodies. 13 of the 59 injured Americans had been flown to an American Army hospital in West Germany. A U.S. spokesman here said they were suffering from burns and puncture wounds. 2 or 3 of them are in critical condition, but there were no deaths reported. Greek and American investigators sifting through the wreckage have found traces of a clock and some wire, which a Greek police source said indicated the device was homemade. The 1,500 American service personnel based here have been told to avoid the area while the investigation is going on. The bar is one of several dozen in a seaside resort frequented by off-duty American military people from the nearby Helenikon Air Base.
One of those people was Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Robert Agee.
There was not a lot of panic that I would consider panic, but there was a lot of screaming and yelling. There were an awful lot of married couples, or at least couples, in the bar, and there were husbands trying to find wives and boyfriends trying to find girlfriends and that kind of thing. Everybody was going towards the door of the bar. There was quite a jam up at the door to go out onto the street. I had never been in that place before, so I wasn't that familiar with which way to the door. I looked straight ahead, and there was a hole in the wall, which seemed to me a hell of a lot better way to get out of that place quickly.
And it was really, really black in there, and something was pushing me, like the force of the bomb was pushing me. And I remember the force pushed me into somebody, and he fell, and I just kind of stood. As he fell, I remember reaching for something, and I felt like the wall. So I kind of stood there, and I remember yelling to everybody, you know, don't run, don't run.
Whether Americans are on or off duty hasn't made much difference in Athens, and terrorist attacks there, as in other world locations, have also focused on more than one service.
There was strict security at the U.S. Air Force Base in Athens tonight, and military officials were not available to talk about the attack. Greek police say 2 gunmen riding a motorcycle ambushed an American postal officer as he was driving from the American military mission to the air base. Sergeant Robert Judd was shot in the shoulder and hand before accelerating his vehicle away from the attackers. He reached the safety of the base before being rushed to the hospital. His condition is described as good.
I was hit in the arm, hit in the back, and it's been almost 20 months, and I still really haven't recovered totally physically. I remember looking at the windows all shattered and hoping that they hadn't hit something that was going to cause me to bleed to death. The mental scars will always be there, as with any of these terrorist attacks. It's something that's totally unexpected, something that you think happens to the other guy. You see it on television, you hear it on the radio, and you say, boy, that's nasty, that's a terrible thing to have happen to anybody. But you never really think that it's going to happen to you. You don't, it's something that happens to the other guy.
A terrorist's attitude toward an attack is usually impersonal, but the results sure aren't. Just before Christmas, members of the U.S. military were aboard this Italian train when a bomb exploded in a tunnel. One of them was seriously injured. Then there was the infamous Oktoberfest bombing in Munich.
The enormous blast at the main entrance of the famous Miles Square Oktoberfest grounds was heard for miles. The explosion tossed bodies into the street in front of the still crowded park, killing 7 people instantly, including 3 young children. Hundreds of festival goers were in the immediate area when the bomb went off, 10 minutes before closing time. Eyewitnesses said the deafening blast was preceded by a ball of flame which leaped 15 feet in the air. Many of the dead were burned beyond recognition, and doctors said most of the injured were treated for burns, concussions, and shrapnel wounds. The city of Munich mobilized the largest emergency squad since the terrorist attack on Israeli athletes there during the 1972 Olympics. Taxis and private cars were pressed into service as panicky survivors fought to escape the scene of terror. As city water trucks hosed away the debris and workers washed off the mud-splattered signs, concessionaires assessed the damage from what police are saying was an expertly made pipe bomb detonated by a professional.
One booth attendant said she was less than 15 feet from the blast, which tore a 2-foot-wide crater in the pavement. She said she was stunned by the noise and still can't believe she escaped injury.
While some American service people were casualties at the Oktoberfest in Munich, many more had a good time, as you can do almost any place in the world by using common sense. Avoid the personal threat of terrorism by not being predictable. Maintain low visibility to keep from calling attention to yourself as an American. And remember to be alert.
I think the most important thing is to be aware that it could happen, that the threat is very, very real. You don't have to be in a bombing to recognize and appreciate the fact that terrorism works.
They were just totally astounded that anybody would have the audacity to do this to Americans.
There's ways to avoid it, and I wish I would have known it then.
I think we have to try to blend in more with the local populace of that country, wherever it is, whether it's Greece or Germany, and maintain a lower profile. Learn the customs and traditions of the local country so we're aware of how the people in that country react and behave, so when something is out of the ordinary, we can recognize it.
I never thought I'd be a victim, but you never really know. It could happen again tomorrow, just walking down the street.